I think the problem that journalism sometimes has with poverty is the same problem it has with reporting on wars. We can report on a war. In fact, there are 100 or more wars on right now, and we can report this fact. But we're not very good at analysing why there are wars. We can report on the existence of poverty, but we're not very good at asking questions like, why are some people experiencing poverty at that level? So what I would like to see journalism do in the future is to move beyond simply telling stories to analysing structures, to asking, in some ways, moral or philosophical questions, structural, political questions about why it is that poverty exists in the European Union at this level, 80 million people out of our population. Why is that the case? What are the stilts that poverty walks on? And then to communicate that to a mass audience and to have a public conversing about why poverty exists. At the moment, what we do is take it for granted. I would define poverty in both absolute and relative terms. I mean, I've visited parts of the world where I've seen life-threatening poverty, in parts of Africa and parts of Sri Lanka and other parts of the world where I've reported from. But I've also seen poverty which simply encases people in a prison-like experience within the United Kingdom, where there is a ceiling on top of people's ambitions, on top of people's sense of confidence, their self-esteem, what they feel they can do. And of course, in my own personal experience, I came from a situation of poverty in my own upbringing, because I had a father who was alcoholic, who drank all the money. I had a mother who was working 3 or 4 jobs a day to try and compensate for some of that, and that was an extraordinarily difficult situation. And I think I can draw a little bit on my own experiences of how education, for example, helped me to find a journey out of poverty and draw somewhat on that experience. But even then, you have to remember that poverty is bespoke. Poverty is unique to every person, and someone's experiences of social exclusion is not the same thing as someone else's experience of social exclusion. I think journalism needs to grow up. Journalism needs to mature in terms of the way we report poverty and the way we deal with these very, very serious questions. So what I'd like my colleagues to do is ask questions about the language we use about poverty, about the lack of analysis underlying many of the stories when we report poverty, and the fact that unless poverty stories come to us sometimes dressed up and calling themselves poverty stories, we're not sometimes able to see the poverty story inside other stories. So for example, in Northern Ireland, sometimes when we report on sectarianism or racism or homophobia, beneath that story, there are poverty stories propping up those other stories. We need to have the intelligence to unpack those other stories and recognize that poverty, social exclusion, social inequality is part of those stories too. Well, from a journalistic point of view, I would like that year to be a year-long re-education programme for journalism across the European Union. In Ireland and in the United Kingdom particularly, I would like us to ask those deeper questions, to dig deeper under the surface of the experience of poverty and ask more serious questions. If we can do that in a year and ask the right questions at the end of the year, just ask the right questions, we'll have made some progress.